Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. This one is on the topic of the power of possibility with Microsoft's Power Platform and Power BI. We are super excited because this is a highly requested webinar from so many people. This topic is super exciting, and there's honestly some really great topics that we don't really see too many people post about. And one in particular, Rick is going to show you, that's just really exciting. It's not really seen, heard about, or done. So Rick will give you guys a really awesome presentation on this topic and some of the really cool projects that we've worked on with clients. So you're going to see real projects and real solutions that we've worked on. And we just want to say thank you to everyone for joining. If you haven't met me yet before, my name is Ruthie Senanayake, and I work here on the marketing team at Blueprint. And if you have not heard too much about Blueprint, feel free to hop onto our website. It is bpcs.com. You can also email us at info@bpcs.com to learn more about us, or if you have further questions about the webinar that you'd like to learn more. And without further ado, I will pass things along to Rick. And Rick, if you can give us a quick intro about you, and then feel free to hop right into the content.
Great. Thanks, Ruthie. Hi, everyone. My name is Rick Freitas. I'm a senior business intelligence engineer at Blueprint, and I also manage our team of BI engineers. I've been at Blueprint here for just over 3 years now, but have over 30 years in the tech industry. And I've been focusing primarily on BI and analytics for the last 17 years. My expertise has been with Power BI, but I've been growing my skill set in the Microsoft Power Platform space as well. I'm really excited to talk to you about two unique use cases that utilizing Power Platform and SharePoint with a prior client. It was probably about 4 months ago. And really the goal here is to show you how transformative the Power Platform can be to your business, and ultimately how Blueprint can help you make that happen and utilizing our consulting services. Now, while I'm only going to be showcasing two recent examples of things that we've done with the Power Platform, I have some others if we have time that we can discuss that we've done. And then certainly feel free to reach out to us after this webinar to discuss anything that you would have in the BI Analytics Power Platform space. Finally, just from a housekeeping perspective, so we're clear, since we are a consulting company and we do work for clients, I don't have actually working demos of these use cases. Since we lose access to their environment once the engagement is complete. But I have tried to capture kind of the concepts of what these use cases are in diagrams as well as screenshots. So I think it will give you a kind of a complete picture of what we're trying to, what we did here. And we're going to keep it relatively high level. I'll talk about a few things that are a little tech related, but knowing that most people on the call probably aren't Power Platform developers, we'll keep this at a relatively high level. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over and kind of look at my other screen here that has the PowerPoint deck. So excuse me if you have to look at the side of my head. So let's go ahead and get this kicked off. So we're calling this the Power of Possibility with Microsoft's Power Platform and Power BI. And so before we kind of talk about these different use cases, I do want to kind of just give you an overview of the Power Platform. You may or may not be familiar with it. So really, what is the Power Platform? It's just a suite of low-code tools designed to enhance productivity and streamline processes, right? So we're going to focus on predominantly Power BI, Power Apps, and Power Automate, because those are what we utilized in the solutions that we provided. But I do want you to have a kind of a broader view of the complete ecosystem here. And so Power Platform was created in 2019, and it essentially becomes the umbrella for all these multiple products that evolved over time. And what I mean by that is, so we think about some of these, like for instance, Power BI. Power BI was released in 2015, right? And in fact, if you're a Power BI user, you know that even back to 2010, we started seeing iterations of what became Power BI showing up in Microsoft Excel. Power Apps and Power Automate. Power Automate used to be called Microsoft Flow. Those two were created around 2016. And as we think about all of these products, this is the evolution that Microsoft typically takes, like they did. It's basically their bundling strategy, right? Like they've done with Office, and now what they've done with Microsoft Fabric. Is trying to create some kind of value around the integration of different products and provide kind of a more seamless and consistent user experience across those. And I think, that's primarily why Power Platform was pulled together here. As we think about a few other things in here, one of the real big ones that is new is the Copilot Studio. So, we had Power Virtual Agents before, but Copilot Studio has really been integrated into the Power Platform. The generative AI abilities, creating GPTs, that kind of thing. And not only just Copilot Studio, but Copilot in and of itself has been integrated across all of these products, right? So your ability to prompt and ask questions around things that you're trying to accomplish within each one of these products is now present and very relevant for the development of what you're trying to do. Power Pages is external facing websites that certainly get some use in the Power Platform. And then we have these second tier services below. Data connectors. We've got data connectors that connect to just about anything and everything that's out there, over 700 plus, that are used across these different tools that are available in the Power Platform. AI Builder is another AI related tool, but it's more specific to smaller use cases like sentiment analysis, object detection, and form processing. Dataverse really is your cloud-based storage option, a data warehouse in the cloud that you can utilize. And then PowerFX, which is a declarative language, not unlike the data analysis expressions or DAX measures that are used in Power BI. So that is kind of the complete view of Power Platform. It's important that you understand kind of what comprises of this tool set, because we're going to talk about several of these for sure as we dig into these use cases. So let me go ahead and go to the next slide. So I just wanted to throw this in here because really, when we think about usage and adoption for Power Platform, it's been quite amazing, really. The usage story is really around the cost and time savings by using Power Platform, and really calls out kind of how companies are building legions of automators, so Power Automators, and app makers, so Power Apps makers, right? And we just see that happening across the industry. Very large organizations, them saving tremendous amounts of time and money by utilizing Power Platform. And then as we think about adoption here clearly has been impressive over the last couple of years. Just in the last year alone, 50% year-over-year growth. A lot of organizations using Power Automate and Power Apps as well. So that, I want to give you kind of just that brief overview to kind of ground us on what the Power Platform is before we start talking about these different solutions and use cases that we had. So the first one that we did was called Push Insights via SMS. And this was utilizing Power Automate. So let's dig into this a little bit. So the problem that our customer was having was they have about 1,300 field sales folks that have these performance metrics that they're trying to achieve on a daily basis, get rolled up weekly, that kind of thing. And they were noticing that that these field sales folks were not utilizing the Power BI report that was available. And I think they even had a mobile version of that Power BI report, but nobody was really utilizing. They could look at the usage metrics from the report and realize, out of these 1,300, a few number of folks were actually using this. So we basically took a look at what that issue was and said, well, let's create a Power Automate workflow that solves this. And really, to just distill this down, what we were really solving was the difference between a pull versus a push model, right? So when you think about these field sales folks, they were actually having to pull data into their environment, to be able to look at their metrics. They're having to go to the dashboard either through a web browser or the service or pulling it up on their phone. Just really not a good way to do that. So our solution here was, let's push the information that the individual needs to them, to their phone through an SMS text message, and allow that to be the mechanism for them to see what their daily performance was about. So I want you to keep that concept in mind, that pull versus push, because as we talk about just this Power Automate solution, I can imagine there are multiple solutions you could think about within your own organization. And it may not even have to do with field sales folks, where somebody getting information pushed to them versus them having to pull that makes all the difference in being able to stay up to date on what's going on, right? So let's take a look at just a very high level diagram of how this works. So again, we're talking about using Power Automate here to send SMS text messages from a Power BI report. And so the left side here is just really showing how the first step, and we'll show this in subsequent slides, the first step is really how you need to embed Power Automate into your Power BI report. And then from there, the Power Automate flow, the workflow that you establish, then has multiple things that it needs to do to ultimately send a SMS text message to a group of users. And so this diagram is just trying to give you kind of a high level concept of that. If we go to the next slide, again, this is really kind of the first step. So I want to show you what the original report looked like. So this report was created, it's a Power BI report, was created where a user can come in. I've anonymized the name or basically got rid of the name above, but this is at the individual level. They can come in, they look at their total volume, they look at their minimum goal, their 100% goal, and how much to go to that goal, and then a maximum goal, right? And so that's the information that we wanted to send to these field sales folks. And thankfully, there was already a Power BI report set up, but as we explained, nobody was actually using it. So first step here is for us to, when using Power Automate integrated with Power BI, is to add a button in here. This is how you embed Power Automate into the process and get this process started, this workflow started. Now that button becomes the trigger. And it can be a manual trigger, or as we'll see, what we did is we can automate that trigger mechanism. But right now, that's kind of your first step, is to drop a button in there. And you can actually, in fact, hide that button. It doesn't need to be there. But if you did want to kick off the process manually, you could just use the button to do that. So let's move on to the next slide. And let's just talk about the steps within this flow. And we think about this, really, it's just a matter of about 5 different steps. Now, it sounds like that may be easy, but there was certainly some work involved in doing that, right? So as we kind of work from top to bottom, let's look at this first step, which was just using a recurrence step. And this is basically utilizing the button and triggering this process to happen on a daily basis. Doesn't have to be daily, could have been weekly, could have been monthly, but in this case, we're triggering this to happen once a day. It could actually happen multiple times a day if you needed to, but at 9 a.m. for this use case, right? And then we want to query against the data set. And what that means is we actually have to capture some code on what's happening in that Power BI report around that button and the metrics that we're trying to capture in there. Now, this, if you can get a little glimpse of it in here, a lot of code in here, but here's the great thing, and this is similar to just about everything in the Power Automate Power App space, is we didn't actually have to write that code. So there is, if you're familiar with Power BI, there's a tool within or feature within Power BI called Performance Analyzer. And that Performance Analyzer tool lets you take a look at how performant your report is, a particular page of your report, how long it takes to load particular visuals, and more specifically, what's the DAX query that's being sent to the storage engine to then do the work that it needs to. So when you change, let's say, a slicer on the page, what is that DAX query that's getting sent off to the storage engine? And in fact, by using the Performance Analyzer, you can copy that code, that DAX code in there, and drop it right in here and utilize that. So you're actually not having to build that on your own or create that on your own. So we did that. So then the next step was to parse out the JSON that gets created from that data set or that DAX query that you have. And the importance of that is that's what makes it dynamic. That's what let us iterate over the different fields that are going to be available in the text message, and then change those or iterate over those for each individual. So you have to do a little bit of work of parsing out JSON to do that. But again, here's one thing I really love about Microsoft products is the community that's involved. Again, very good instructions, a blog post, other information available about how you go about doing that. Again, not writing out a whole bunch of code here, but just having to modify what was already created here to make that work. And then the fourth step here in the blue is just this iteration step. It's that recurrence that needs to happen to go through everybody that's on the list of people that are going to get this SMS text message, right? And then finally, the last step here is crafting out what that text message and dropping these fields that are dynamic relative to the person, right? So obviously hid the person name, but this is really just kind of crafting what that SMS message would look like to a user. And again, this could be anything. We're just utilizing the data that was available in the Power BI report that was given to us, that is the information that they want pushed to these users, right? So again, 5 steps here as part of the Automate flow. And then if we just take a look at the final result, really based on doing that work, you can see we've got the original report on the left that has those metrics that we were trying to capture, the minimum goal, 100% goal, maximum goal. And we're basically sending that to the user. And they'll be getting that then every day, and they're getting a status update of that data because the Power BI report is refreshing, everything is automated, and they'll be getting an update of those numbers every day as it comes in, so they can go back through the week and look and see how they're doing. And again, the primary thing here is they're not having to go to a report. They're not having to pull up anything else on their phone or on their computer. All they're doing is looking at a SMS text message that's coming in daily. Okay, and then final point I wanted to make on this, I'll go back and just we'll look at this slide again, right? You think about the different work, the things we talked about in here, the different code and stuff. I will tell you, I have an engineer on my team that very expert in Power BI wasn't very familiar with Power Automate and certainly has no familiarity with Power Apps. He was able to do this in a couple of weeks. And that's just because he didn't have the ability, he didn't know what to do first, right? Like there are some templates out there around Power Automate that give you kind of a pattern around how to do things, how to like send text messages for different reasons. It was just a matter of taking that pattern and repurposing it for what we needed, right? But the point I'm trying to make here is that you don't need in most cases, at least from a Power Automate perspective, somebody that is vastly experienced in Power Automate flows. Now, I will say that is different with Power Apps. Power Apps is a little bit different beast in that way that there is a lot of minutia in trying to create an app and getting the right data connections and all that. So I wouldn't say that that's the same in that space. But for Power Automate, absolutely not a big hurdle for somebody that's a knowledge worker and that's got experience with Power BI. Okay, let's move over to the next use case. And I think we're doing good with time here. So let's talk about a solution we put together called the Report Search and Discovery Tool. And so this is an interesting problem, and this isn't a problem that only this client has. And this is absolutely a problem with every client that I've ever dealt with that utilizes Power BI as their presentation layer tool. And the problem is this. The problem is that I can say it in one word, sprawl. If you've been utilizing Power BI for any length of time, this customer I think had for about 3 years, maybe 2 to 3 years, they've got now hundreds of different reports. And the challenge is being able to understand what's in those reports. How do you find those reports? They could be spread out over different workspaces. You could have different groups within your organization creating different reports that then nobody else really knows about, right? And so you could have this just vast number of reports and you'd have no really good built-in mechanism for searching reports. And I want to nail that point home with you by I'm gonna get out of the slide deck here for just a second, and I'm going to go over to just our Blueprints Power BI service, the cloud service that you get with Power BI. And you do have search capability in here, so you can search across workspaces, or you can search in a workspace. But let's go ahead and just do a quick search here on the word sales. And the point I'm trying to make here is that your search capabilities within Power BI service are relatively limited. I can search on the word sales, and this will pull up reports that have the word sales in it. But if I go down farther down the list, you'll see, oh, I've got a dashboard that doesn't say sales. Well, I know that in this case, that dashboard actually has a visual in it called sales. If I go down farther and I look at some of maybe these semantic models, they don't have any names, the word sales in the name of the report, but they have, I know because I've created most of these, they've got a sales table or view within that model, right? So again, the point being that your search mechanism is relatively limited in what you can do. It's basically name-based search. Now let's take this a step further on what you can do within Power BI to maybe help kind of classify, categorize reports. And I'm bringing this up because this is one of the things that this customer tried to utilize to help in this area. And one of those is a feature called Power BI Apps, not to be confused with Power Apps, but Power BI Apps is really a container. It allows you to collect a number of reports together in this container called an app, and then show those to your users. And the additional thing that's available in here is that you can add a category. You can do a category grouping. So as you can see, I've just created this as an example. I've got grouping 1, category grouping 2, and so forth, right? So I can drop different reports. I could give those categories a specific name. So let's take an example where I've got a sales category as my first one. And then let's say I've got an inventory category as my second one. That's great. So I can start putting my sales reports in the sales category. I can start putting my inventory reports in the inventory category here. Great. A little bit more classification than you get anywhere else within Power BI. The challenge, and this is one thing that the client brought up to us, was, well, what if I've got a report that has both sales and inventory in it? You can't put a report, a single report into multiple categories, right? So if I've got a sales and inventory report, I can only put it in the sales category, or I can only put it in the inventory category. So then that kind of breaks my classification pattern that I'm trying to establish here. And I keep that in mind, because that's one of the things we were able to solve in the solution that we put together. So let's go ahead and go back to the deck, and let's talk about the solution in more detail. So again, this is going to be kind of a high-level diagram that I'm providing to kind of show the different components or tools that we used. And then I'm going to break down some of this into subsequent slides so you get a better view. So don't worry if you can't see any of these things here. But the point is, and what I wanted to really show here is that we've got really two things going on here. We've got a bunch of back-end tools and workflow that we created, and then we've got this front-end search report. So think of it from a back-end and a front-end perspective. The front end is, of course, that Power BI search report that we created. On the back end, what we've got is a series of different things, of different tools being utilized here. So specifically and let's start in the upper left corner. So we were able to utilize the Power BI REST APIs that are available. And in fact, in this case, with this customer, they had already taken the REST API data and already warehoused that. So we were able to utilize that. But even if they hadn't, there is ways to pull in this data into Power BI directly, or it's not very hard to data warehouse it if you need to do that. But what we're trying to capture here is just some base level of information around reports that are available up in your service across multiple workspaces. So this REST API data allows us to capture the report name, the report pages within that report, its usage, which you'll see is going to be critical for us in doing some things to understand and prioritize reports when we search them. So when we talk about usage, I'm talking about number of views that a particular report has, number of distinct users. We want to know what workspace this report lives in, and whether or not it's part of an app. So this is kind of that foundational layer of information. Again, really not very useful from a search perspective, but is the basis that we need to start with. And then from there, we're utilizing Power Automate to then capture that REST API data, those reports, report pages, and so on, and then throw that into a SharePoint list. And so that SharePoint list then becomes that area, that list that we can utilize for viewing, for people to view all of these reports broken out. It'll give it a report ID, and it tells you what workspace it's in, and the report name, and a link out to the report. Again, the foundation of the information, but more importantly, what it allows us to do, and that's why I've got this here, is to put a custom form, a Power Apps custom form on top of that list, where now we can start capturing additional metadata that's going to be available from a search perspective. Enrich our search capabilities by adding this additional metadata. And so we did this through a Power Apps form, and I'll show you that in a little bit. But this Power Apps form allows us to collect a report image, which we'll talk about and is crucial, custom tags, categories, and then additional metadata fields that we'll talk about that can be customizable for any solution. In this case, we already had some available, and we'll talk about those. And then from there, basically utilizing the combination of this base data with the data that we captured through the Power Apps form, having that all available in a SharePoint list, and then being able to utilize that in a Power BI report that allows us to do this rich search capabilities. So that's the overall kind of diagram. So let's dig into this a little bit more. So as we talked about here, SharePoint list is crucial here for getting the base level information that we want in here. Again, we're capturing this information using Power Automate from the data that we're getting from the REST APIs, right? So a report ID, a report name, an alias, a description. There's probably 30 plus columns here of information. And then I'm calling out in here really what is the magic around all of this. And it's this edit link button. So if I go to the next page, if you had clicked on this, you now all of a sudden get this Power Apps form. And this is, like I said, this is where all the magic happens. This is where I can capture the plethora amount of information around this specific report that allows me then to search on it, right? So we added a description field up here. This description field is not limited to 255 characters like there is a description field for a semantic model up in your Power BI service, but that's limited in what you can put in there. You can put anything in here. You can describe it to the ends of the earth on what you want this report to say that you would want people to search on it. Then we've got some other fields. So one of them that was created was this category field. In fact, if you look at if you think about category, this equates to that category that we saw in the Power BI apps that I showed you earlier, right? So let's say you had already a classification of some categories there. You could utilize that here, but the big difference is that this isn't a single select. It's multi-select. So if you want to put that report into more than one category, you absolutely can do it here. In fact, all of these fields where it makes sense are multi-select. Now, something like a division probably doesn't make sense, that report. It may cross a couple divisions, may not. But the fact is, multi-select is what's available by the way that we set this up. And if we talk about these other ones, this channel group, channel, key counts, divisions, and sales centers, these were already actually a taxonomy that was already created. There's a thing called the term store in your SharePoint, online. And that term store is really a taxonomy service that can be set up. Luckily, this client had already set that up. But again, that's customizable. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be specifically a channel group or channel or key accounts. It could be anything that you think would be useful in being able to add additional metadata to a report that then makes it searchable, right? And then a couple other things on this page that I thought was crucial in doing this development work was a report image. That report image is right now, or at least the first iteration of doing this, was just the main report page that you see when you pull up a report. And I thought that was useful because not only it kind of helps ground you on that particular report. It may have been one that you've seen before. And then it gives you this visual context around that report. So as you're searching through other reports, like, oh, I remember this one. If I've looked at this one before and I dig down into it, now I have a better visual context around this report. And so adding an image. Now, in this first iteration of us doing this, that was all done manually. In fact, we've actually used Power Automate again to automate the process of capturing images across different workspaces. When I initially did this work with the customer, we were just doing a proof of concept here, so we weren't trying to do all of them, but I captured about 50 images, and that took me at least 3 hours to do. It's just, you have to pull it up, you got to get the right size, you got to click and drag, you got to name it, you got to, give it a naming convention that makes sense, like what workspace is it in, what's the name, right? It just took a lot of time. We've got that now down to where we're basically can do about 6 images every minute. So if you've got hundreds of reports out there, that whole process is just automated for us. And then last but not least is this concept of tags, right? So we've got tags and a lot of other different tools that you can use. But again, there's no tagging mechanism with reports in the Power BI service. And so this approach allowed us to not only utilize a list of tags that were already being used, so you could reselect multiple tags that are already been used, or you could add a new tag. Let's say that you've got a specific KPI or metric that's in this report that you want to make sure, like, hey, if I have to come back to this report, or somebody needs to come back to this report, this is like a new metric that we're utilizing in the business. I want to be able to see all of those metrics. You use that you use that metric name as a tag, add it in here, and then that becomes another way to search for that particular report. So this is the key to making this all work, is having the ability to capture additional information around a particular report and have that information available as search criteria that you need when trying to find and search and discover for a particular report. All right, so let's talk about, so that was kind of again, when we talked about the first diagram, we had the front end and the back end. Front end tool being the actual Power BI tool. That's what we're going to talk about now. I've just got a couple slides on that. And so let's talk a little bit about how this was put together. So this is nothing more than relatively simple report in Power BI, right? Again, it's not the report that's doing anything special here. It's that additional metadata that we've captured in SharePoint that is really driving force behind making this all work. So as you can see here, really, I've only got one thing that might be out of the ordinary to typical users, and that is this custom visual. It's a free visual. It's called Text Search Slicer, which you can see here at the top. And really, this is just a visualization that you can drop on the page, and it allows you to enter search criteria, but search at different dimensional fields that are available in your data model here, right? So as you can see here, I've pulled in these dimensional fields, the report name. So that really doesn't get us any different than what we've had in search out in the Power BI service. But I've also pulled in report description. And so that report description metadata that we've captured with the Power Apps form then gets utilized here. I've got the category in here, and I've got tags. And in fact, any one of those fields that we had, I could have dragged in here and utilized those as my search mechanism. Now, the reason I'm using this specific visual is because there isn't any other visual or anything within the Power BI report that allows you to search across all of your metadata at once, right? And so there needs to be some kind of mechanism for doing it. This seemed like the most appropriate tool that I could find to do that. Obviously, there are new visuals being added to AppSource, and so over time there may be another one that can be utilized. And then a couple other things on this. This middle section is nothing more than just a table visual. It's not a matrix. It's just a table visual that you just drop your columns in here. And in this case, I've got a certain set of columns just so they would fit on the screen. But obviously, I could have scrolled to the right. There could be every column that you ever wanted in here. It could be all of these different metadata fields that we were capturing with the Power Apps form, channel, division, key account, sales center, so forth. All of those could have been added in here as things that you could utilize to just visually see. And then as you can see, you get a thumbnail for the report image. Now, I will say the only challenge in the in putting together the semantic model or the data model on the Power BI side was having to do some concatenation to get to these report images. In fact, you wouldn't see them if you're doing this in the Power BI desktop. You only see them when you've published this out to the service, because you want those images out somewhere in either OneDrive or SharePoint where they're available for everybody to see and have the right permission set and all that stuff. So we've got a thumbnail image in here, and like I was saying, then it's concatenating a few different pieces to get to the image URL that you need to get that. But really, it wasn't a whole lot of work. It was just getting the right pattern of ID for the report and the image URL, and I think there was a product ID in there too. I can't remember now. And then finally, just as another mechanism or another way to drill down into the report is a set of slicers. Just as you'd see common in any Power BI report, a set of slicers here over on the left that could be used in conjunction with the search box at the top, or could be just used separately alone to start drilling down and finding things. Maybe there's key accounts that you want to make sure specific reports have, and so you choose those key accounts from your drop down there, and that starts bubbling up your list of reports. The other thing, well, let's do this. Let's move over to the next screen, which is basically the last one on this, and I'll explain what I was just going to talk about here. So the final piece of this puzzle in the report was just doing a hover over tooltip. So if I came in here and hovered over anything on any line, then I get this tooltip that pops up. And this tooltip then gives you a larger image. So again, the reasoning behind that is that you may be able to pick out some additional information around some of the wording used. In this case, these would be different navigation buttons to different parts. So price mix and trend and share gives you a little bit more understanding of what might be in the report. And then also a list of report pages over here that may or may not be useful depending on governance you have within your organization around naming report pages. Obviously, there's always going to be report pages that are typically hidden. Those are going to show up in this list. I probably could have done something to remove those. But again, just giving you additional information on what might be available in this particular report based on your search criteria. And then at the bottom, what's really, I think, valuable here, and what I was going to show on the next screen, but we can talk about here, is really report statistics and really understanding the number of views a particular report has, and the number of percent of total views, distinct users, and percent of distinct users. Now, I will say again, we were a little constrained in time in getting this work done. I can think of multiple different things that we could have done around this area to make it a little bit more prominent on how useful this report, or how much more usage this report has gotten relative to other reports. I can think of a rank function that we could have probably used here. I could also think of some color coding around understanding, report views of 950 relative to what, right? Well, it's trying to give me that with the percent of total views. But again, that, there could be some additional things that we could have done around here. The additional point that I wanted to make here was that, in fact, when you do, and it's just going to be easier to show you back on this one, the list, once you've put in your search criteria and you've selected what you wanted here to search on, this list is going to be populated in a sort order. So your sort order is going to show the most viewed report at the very top. I've just got a hidden column that does that for me. So it sorts these. So we know that this CMI Nielsen channel dashboard, in fact, has more report views than this CMI share reporting. And if you scroll down the list, the one at the very bottom would have the least amount of report views, which could be a good indication that that's either one that's not used, or it's been, it's just not a report that people are using anymore. So this is another just way to help give some kind of indication to the user that the reports that are at the very top are the most viewed reports. Then to kind of finish this off, then again, as I had probably mentioned a couple times already, we were a little bit constrained. We had about 3 weeks to really get this work done. My assumption in dropping this or doing anything like this the next time, since we've done a lot of automation work and we've got the pattern in place, is that it certainly wouldn't take as long in the next iteration of this. But as we think about what we did here and what we were trying to accomplish and the solution that we provided for giving this customer the ability now to search through literally hundreds of different reports and having the ability to find one, there are some additional things that we can think about that would be useful. Now, I already called out this first bullet, which is automate report image capture. We were able to get that done in the last few weeks, have that available if we need to drop that into any other engagement that we're going to do. Another thing around Power Automate that could be very useful. So you might have somebody that is supposed to be the one that actually publishes reports, but is not going to be the person responsible for adding the metadata around that report. And so you could automate the sending of a email out to the person or persons responsible for actually adding the additional metadata to a particular report, so that data then bubbles up to the SharePoint list and then can be used from the Power BI report. And then when we think about some, really big things that would be cool to do, generative AI absolutely comes into play here. You think about utilizing an LLM to, search. So instead of maybe not even using or integrating, could certainly integrate into a report, but just separately having the ability to prompt over looking for, a report that has these key accounts, or a report that contains this metric or this DAX measure, or a report that has inventory related to it, and being able to prompt that, and then seeing a list of those reports and then linking out to something to see that report could be very useful. And then you think about the fact that we've gone through the process of capturing images, right? And so we talked about just capturing the main image, but the Power Automate flow, in fact, could capture every report page image, and then utilizing AI to actually capture information out of those images and create descriptions around the report. A lot of times you'll get column heading names, and you'll get names around the measure columns that you've created, and or the navigation buttons across the top, or even just a sense of what the report is doing. Let's say you've got a time series line chart in there, being able to describe that, hey, you've got time series going, over the last 6 months over this, right? The ability to throw AI on top of the images that you've already captured and be able to use that as a way to get more enriched descriptions around what that report contains would be absolutely valuable in the process, and some things that we certainly are thinking about as this solution becomes, I think, something that, again, any customer that is utilizing Power BI and needs to understand the sprawl problem that they have with reports would be useful. And in fact, if we think about sprawl, I can envision even another view of the Power BI report that allows you to compare reports, right? Maybe two side by side, and say, based on the search criteria that I've provided, I've got a list of reports here. Why do I have, these reports that look similar? What is the difference between these reports? And being able to drill down and understand, if you've got reports, because, that happens with us, right? We'll create a report maybe a couple years ago that was doing something, and then somebody takes that report and adds something additional to that model. And then that just kind of sprawls out of place. So the ability to manage that sprawl, even through a direct comparison of different reports, I could imagine being a very useful thing that we could do in the tool. We just, again, didn't do it in this first iteration of the tool. So that is what I had for those two use cases. We do have a few minutes left here. Again, as we think about what we just went over today, right? So this Power BI search and discovery tool is pretty specific, right? But is applicable to any organizations using Power BI. But we think about that SMS text messaging scenario. And we think about, I can just think of many different scenarios where you've got customers or you've got folks that may be in your field that, again, need data pushed to them instead of them having to go out to a report, or just even anybody in the front office that's wanting to see things. Think about CEOs or executives that want to have a daily update on sales from their e-commerce site, on what's trending up, what's trending down. Having the ability to send that information to them automated on a daily basis based on a report that's out there that many times they're not going to go to could be very useful. So I want you to think about those different scenarios that could be involved in utilizing some kind of push mechanism. As we think about other things that we've done, in fact, just internally for Blueprint, one of the things that we have doing a proof of concept for right now is that there's a lot of internal events and meetings. We think about how we try to share information across the organization, how we have bi-weekly kind of town hall meetings that we do. And in SharePoint, we have an intranet site, like just probably everybody does, that's powered on SharePoint. And we have an events calendar in there that has information around these different events. And one of the challenges is that there are events that happen maybe out of schedule that people aren't used to. So how do you set up a mechanism for allowing people to understand, let's say once a new event has dropped, what that event is, when it's happening, and more importantly, how do they get that event into their calendar? Right. And so we've got a proof of concept that does exactly that, where if a new event lands into our events calendar, then we have a process that kicks off an email to a group of users. And that email tells you what that event is. And more importantly, it has attached the calendar. If you're using Microsoft products, you've got an ICS file. That ICS file, then you just click on it and it gets automatically added to your calendar. You could also do the same thing, and we have it part of the POC as well, where then it can post that same information to a Teams channel. So when any new event again happens, it's posting to a Teams channel. People are, at least from a Teams channel perspective, going to get some kind of notification in that Teams channel. They can go and look and see. Again, there's multiple different things. We could even take it as far as doing the SMS text messaging in that scenario, where if a new event drops into the calendar, sends an email or a text message to people, or even set it up where, hey, it's a reminder, and a day before that event is happening, send a reminder to people on their phone that this event is happening, right? So the scenarios, the things that you can do are infinite, right? So that it's about thinking about what are those process flows that happen in your organization, and how can you solve that reduces the amount of time it takes to do manual steps and the amount of time and cost that takes, all right, to do certain things. I think about some other not simple, but other automation flows that we've done. A pretty typical one in the Power BI world is to kick off the refresh of a report based on some kind of a semantic model, not a report, but the kickoff of the refresh of a particular semantic model relative to some other trigger. Well, we do have one customer that utilizes data flows. So data flows is essentially Power Query in the cloud, where you can set up your transforms on data, and then you can utilize that data flow in your Power BI semantic model. Well, if you've utilized a lot of data flows, then and those are on a refresh schedule, and something happens in the refresh schedule of those data flows, then you don't want to be using capacity in your service, in your Power BI service, to then all of a sudden go kick off your semantic model refresh if your upstream data source has not been refreshed, right? So we've set up Power Automate flows that do check to make sure that the data flow refresh has taken place. If something broke in that process, then email somebody that would be involved in the process to let them know. And more importantly, don't kick off the refresh of this model that's going to take capacity, because now it's got no data that's actually refreshing, right? And so there's another relatively simple automation flow that could be set, but that could, again, it's saving you money when you think about if you've got a premium capacity for Power BI. You don't want to be refreshing, a 300 meg model that doesn't have data that needs refreshed because it didn't get it from the data flow. And then finally, I know that we've done some really good work around meetings and communities. So one group that we've worked with has got over like 60 different communities with thousands of different people that are part of these communities. And they wanted to have a way to be able to understand who's attending these meetings, how many meetings are happening, at what time, create some kind of report that shows this information. Well, the first step, like it is for many things, is to capture that information. So utilizing Power Apps to be able to capture the attendance list off of a particular meeting that just took place, and then marry that with additional information around what that meeting was doing, and then bubbling that information up into a report was a really valuable kind of Power Automate, Power Apps flow that or tool that we created with another engagement. So I think that's what I've got. Again, folks, anybody have any questions or comments? Love to hear them. Otherwise, I could give you a couple minutes back.